Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comment section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Gerald Eugene Stano was born on September 12, 1951, in Schenectady, New York. His name at birth was Paul Zahninger. He was the fifth child born to his biological mother. She could not care for him or his siblings. She gave all of her children up for adoption. When Gerald was only 6 months old, he was in very poor health. County doctors examined him and said he was not fit for adoption. They said he functioned at an animal-like level. He was so neglected that he had eaten his own waste to survive. A nurse named Norma Stano felt sorry for the baby. She decided to adopt him. She and her husband became his foster parents. They were described as a loving couple. They legally changed his name from Paul Zahninger to Gerald Eugene Stano. Despite their care, Gerald showed behavioral problems from a young age. In school, Gerald was a poor student. He received low grades, mostly CS and DS, in nearly every subject. The only class he did well in was music. He had a habit of telling compulsive lies. He wanted friends and approval, but did not know how to get it honestly. One incident showed this clearly. He was on the track and field team, but he was not a fast runner. He was often the last to finish. To avoid this embarrassment, he stole money from his father's wallet. He used this money to pay other boys on the team. He paid them to run slower than him during races, so he would not finish last. Gerald was often bullied by other children during his youth. He did not know how to respond in a normal way. Instead, he began to act out in more serious ways. When he was 14 years old, the police arrested him for pulling a false fire alarm. Later, the police arrested him again for throwing rocks at cars from a highway overpass. He struggled to finish his education. Gerald did not graduate from high school until he was 21 years old, which was much older than the other students. After receiving his diploma, he enrolled in a computer programming school. He completed the courses and graduated. He then got a job working in the records department of a local hospital. This job did not last long. He was fired after he was caught stealing money from the purses and wallets of his coworkers. After this, Gerald moved with his adoptive parents to Ormond Beach, Florida. In Florida, he could not keep a job. He was fired from one job after another. The reasons were usually for being late all the time or for stealing from the workplace. During this time, he committed a serious violent act. He raped a mentally disabled girl in the neighborhood. The girl became pregnant because of this assault. Gerald's parents found out. They paid for the girl to have an abortion. There was no police report made about this rape at the time. After moving to Florida and losing many jobs, Gerald Stano began to commit violent crimes. His first confessed murder happened in New Jersey in 1969, when he was 18 years old. He claimed he killed a young woman there, but this could not be proven much later because there was no physical evidence. He also said he killed 6 women in Pennsylvania during this early time. These claims were investigated almost 20 years later, but no charges were filed due to lack of evidence. When he was in his 20s, living in Florida, the killings became more frequent. His method was usually the same. He would drive around and look for young women who were in vulnerable situations. Many of his victims were hitchhiking, were sex workers, or were alone in public places like shopping malls or near bars. He would offer them a ride or offer to pay them for company. On March 21, 1973, 2 young women, Janine Ligatino, age 19, and an Arsenault, age 17, were found stabbed to death in a vacant lot in Gainesville, Florida. This was one of the first crimes linked to him in Florida. He picked them up, and after an argument, he killed them. On September 6, 1973, 16-year-old Barbara Bauer was found in Bradford County, Florida. She had been strangled. She was last seen at a shopping mall in Holly Hill. Stano had abducted her from there. On January 19, 1974, the body of 17-year-old Kathy Scharf was found by hunters. She had been hitchhiking. Stano confessed that he picked her up, then stabbed and strangled her sometime in late December 1973 or early January 1974. His pattern continued. He would pick up a woman, drive to a secluded place, and then an argument would start. The arguments were often about money or nothing at all. He would then become violent. He used different methods to kill. Some victims were strangled with his hands or a piece of clothing. Some were stabbed many times with a knife he carried. Later, he began to use a gun to shoot some of his victims. In November 1974, an unidentified woman was found dead in Altamonte Springs, Florida. She had been stabbed. In 1982, Stano confessed to this murder. He said he picked her up while she was hitchhiking on Interstate 4. They argued, and he killed her. On January 2, 1975, Nancy Hurd, age 24, was found strangled near Ormond Beach. She had been hitchhiking. Her body was posed and covered with branches. On May 19, 1975, 18-year-old Diana Valek was found shot to death in an empty lot in Wesley Chapel, Florida. On June 10, 1975, 12-year-old Susan Basile was last seen getting off a school bus in Port Orange. Stano later confessed he offered her a ride to a skating rink. Instead, he drove her to a wooded area, strangled her, and covered her body with palm fronds. Her body was never found. On July 22, 1975, 16-year-old Linda Hamilton was found strangled and buried in sand on a beach in New Smyrna Beach. She had last been seen walking down a road. In December 1975, the strangled body of 21-year-old Emily Branch was found in a creek. Also in December 1975, 24-year-old Susan Bickrest was kidnapped from her workplace in Daytona Beach. Stano killed her. He did not stop. On February 11, 1976, 25-year-old Bonnie Williams Hughes was found beaten to death near a highway. On May 29, 1976, 18-year-old Ramona Neal was found strangled in a state park, her body hidden with branches. In the fall of 1977, he shot and killed two more women, 18-year-old Joan Foster and 39-year-old Emily Grieve. In October 1977, 23-year-old Phoebe Winston went missing. Her skeletal remains were found in 1979. She had been shot. On November 11, 1977, 23-year-old Kathleen Muldoon was beaten and shot. Her body was found in a ditch. She was a student who had accepted a ride from an acquaintance. His crimes continued into 1978 and 1979. Sandra Dubose, 25, was found shot on a deserted road in August 1978. Christine Goodson, 16, was found dead in April 1979. Dorothy Williams, 17, was found stabbed and beaten behind a hotel in Tampa in 1979. On March 23, 1980, a prostitute named Toni Van Haddix was reported missing. Her skeletal remains were found in April 1980 in a wooded area in Holly Hill. She had been stabbed many times in the head. Stano was linked to this killing. Throughout this time, the police in different Florida counties were investigating many separate murders of young women. They did not immediately connect all these crimes to one man. The victims were found in different counties, and the methods of killing were not always the same. Because of this, a single investigation was not formed for several years. The event that directly led to Gerald Stano being identified happened on March 24, 1980. A sex worker named Donna Hensley escaped from a hotel room in Daytona Beach. She had been stabbed 30 times by a man she knew as a client named Gerald. She survived and went to the police. She was able to give them his name and identify him. She told them he had picked her up. They went to a room, argued, and he suddenly attacked her with a knife before leaving her for dead. Based on the statement from Donna Hensley, the Daytona Beach police located and arrested Gerald Stano on April 1, 1980. He was charged with the attempted murder of Hensley. While he was in jail for this crime, detectives from other Florida counties began to look at him for their unsolved murder cases. They noticed a pattern. Many of their victims were young women last seen hitchhiking, or in areas Stano was known to frequent. A detective from Volusia County, named Paul Crow, took a particular interest in Stano. Detective Crow spent many hours talking to Stano in jail. Over a period of months, Stano began to confess to murders. He first confessed to killing Tony Van Haddix, whose remains had been found in Holly Hill. He gave details about her murder that had not been made public. This confirmed he was involved. Detective Crow continued these conversations. Stano eventually began confessing to more and more murders. He provided details about the victims, where he picked them up, how he killed them, and where he left their bodies. He confessed to murders in several Florida counties, and also to killings in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. He drew maps for detectives to find bodies. In some cases, like that of the unidentified woman in Altamonte Springs from 1974, his confession was the only information police had. The police and prosecutors made a deal with Stano. In exchange for his detailed confessions and his help in closing dozens of unsolved cases, he would not receive the death penalty for most of the murders. He agreed to this deal. He pleaded guilty to multiple murders. However, this deal did not cover all counties. One county, Brevard County, decided to prosecute him separately and seek the death penalty. For the murder of Kathy Lee Scharf, the 17-year-old hitchhiker found in 1974, Stano was put on trial. During this trial, the jury heard all the evidence of his other confessions. He was found guilty of first-degree murder for Scharf's death. The judge sentenced him to death in the electric chair. For the other murders he confessed to, he was given multiple life sentences. In total, he was convicted of 9 murders and received 8 life sentences and 1 death sentence. He was sent to Florida State Prison to await execution. While on death row, Stano shared a prison block with another serial killer, Ted Bundy. Stano's execution was delayed for many years by appeals. His lawyers argued that his many confessions were not reliable. They said he was a compulsive liar and that Detective Crow had manipulated him into confessing to crimes he did not commit. The courts reviewed these claims but ultimately upheld his convictions and death sentence. On March 23, 1998, Gerald Stano was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. For his final meal, he requested a large dinner including steak, ice cream, and Pepsi. When asked for a final statement, he declared his innocence. He said he was frightened and had been threatened. He claimed he confessed to crimes he did not commit because he was held for months without proper legal help. The state proceeded with the execution. After the case, the families of the victims had some answers, but many lives were permanently damaged. One of his victims, Pamela K. Whitman, remained unidentified until 2024, when DNA technology and genealogical research finally gave her back her name. Detective Paul Crow always maintained that Stano's confessions were genuine and detailed, providing closure for dozens of families. Gerald Eugene Stano was pronounced dead at 7:10 p.m. Story 2. Robert Hansen was born on February 15, 1939, in Esterville, Iowa. He was the older of 2 children. His father, Christian, was a baker. His mother's name was Edna. The family moved to Richmond, California, for a few years when Robert was young, but they moved back to Iowa in 1949. They settled in the small city of Pocahontas. As a boy, Robert was very shy. He did not have many friends. He had a stutter, which made it hard for him to talk to people. He also had very bad acne on his face. The acne left permanent scars. These things made him feel alone and different from other children. He did not have a good relationship with his father. His father was very strict and controlling. Robert felt he could never please him. To get away from his problems, Robert spent a lot of time alone in the woods. He learned to hunt with a gun and a bow. He became a very good shot. Hunting was the one thing he felt he was good at, and it was something he could do by himself. He worked for his father in the family bakery after school. It was hard work, and he did not enjoy it. In 1957, when he was 18 years old, Robert joined the United States Army Reserve. He served for 1 year and then was discharged. After returning home, he got a job as an assistant teacher at a small police academy in Pocahontas. There, he met a younger woman. They began a relationship and got married in 1960. For a short time, his life seemed to be becoming more normal. However, Robert still felt deep anger about his past. He thought about how he was treated in high school. He felt people had been mean to him and that he was an outsider. He wanted to get back at them. On December 7, 1960, he acted on this anger. He set fire to a school bus garage in Hamilton County. The garage burned down. He was quickly arrested for this crime. Robert was sentenced to 3 years in prison. He served 20 months at the Anamosa State Penitentiary. While he was in prison, his wife divorced him. He was alone again. Prison doctors examined his mind. They said he had a condition called manic depression. They also said he sometimes had schizophrenic episodes. The doctor wrote that Robert had an infantile personality, meaning he acted like a child in some ways. The doctor noted that Robert was obsessed with getting revenge on people he felt had wronged him. After he was released from prison, Robert struggled to live a straight life. Over the next few years, he was arrested several more times. These arrests were for small crimes like theft. In 1963, he married a second woman. They had 2 children together. In 1967, hoping for a fresh start, Robert moved his family to Anchorage, Alaska. In Alaska, Robert opened his own bakery. To his neighbors and customers, he seemed like a quiet, hard-working family man. He continued his hobby of hunting and even set some local hunting records. He was well-liked in his community, but his old problems and anger were still there, hidden beneath the surface. Robert Hansen's life in Anchorage looked ordinary from the outside, but his hidden anger began to surface in violent ways. His crimes started with attacks on women he felt he could control. In December of 1971, Hansen committed 2 separate crimes within a short time. First, he attacked a housewife. He abducted her and tried to rape her. He was arrested for this. Then, while out on bail, he raped a sex worker. He was arrested again. To avoid a trial for the rape charge, Hansen agreed to a plea bargain. He pleaded no contest to assault with a deadly weapon for the first attack. The rape charge was dropped. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison. However, he only served 6 months in jail before he was allowed into a work release program. He was then moved to a halfway house and soon released back into the community. After his release, Hansen's violent behavior escalated from assault to murder. He developed a specific method for his crimes. He would often find women who were dancers or sex workers, as he believed they were less likely to be reported missing quickly. He would sometimes offer them money for a photo shoot or for private dancing. He would pick them up in his car. Once they were in his car, he would pull out a gun to force them to obey him. He would then drive the woman to his home in the Muldoon area of Anchorage. He would take her inside. In his basement, he would chain her up. He would then rape and assault her. After this, he would often take the woman on a second trip. He owned a small, single-engine airplane. He would take the woman to Merrill Field, a a small airport in Anchorage. He would force her into his plane. Hansen would fly the plane to a very remote part of the wilderness around Anchorage. These areas were only accessible by plane or boat. He had favorite spots near the Knik River and in the Matanuska-Susitna Valley. Once they landed in the wilderness, his method would change. He would sometimes release the woman and then hunt her down with a rifle, as if she were an animal. He would sometimes shoot or stab her to death. He would then bury the body in a shallow grave in the remote area. His first known murder victim was an unidentified woman. Hansen later said she was a topless dancer. He stabbed her in the back when she tried to run from his car. He buried her body near Eklutna Road. When her body was found in 1980, she was called Eklutna Annie by police. They could not identify her. Over the next several years, Hansen killed many women. He kept a secret map of his burial sites. On an aeronautical chart of the wilderness, he marked small X symbols where he left bodies. He did this to remember the locations. In May of 1980, Hansen met a woman named Joanna Messina in Seward, Alaska. He took her to dinner. Afterwards, he drove her to a remote area near the Snow River. He shot her twice with a .22 caliber revolver. He also shot her dog. He left her body in a gravel pit. Wildlife severely damaged the body before it was found months later. In November of 1981, Hansen met a woman named Sherry Morrow. He promised her $300 to pose for nude photographs. He took her to a remote area near the Knik River. He made her take off her clothes. He then shot her 3 times in the back with a .223 caliber rifle. After she was dead, he dressed her body again. He then buried her in a shallow grave. Hunters found her body almost a year later. In June of 1983, Hansen picked up a 17-year-old girl named Cindy Paulson. He offered her $200 for sex. When she got into his car, he pointed a gun at her. He drove her to his house, chained her in his basement, and raped her. He then told her he was taking her to his remote cabin. He drove her to Merrill Field and began to load his airplane. He left Cindy handcuffed in the back seat of his car. Cindy saw her chance to escape. While Hansen's back was turned, she crawled out of the car. She ran toward 6th Avenue, a nearby road. Hansen chased her, but she reached the road first. A man named Robert Yount was driving a truck on 6th Avenue. Cindy waved her arms desperately. Yount stopped and let her into his truck. He could see she was handcuffed and very frightened. He drove her to a nearby motel called the Mush Inn so she could get help. Yount then drove to his workplace and called the police to report what he had seen. At the Mush Inn, Cindy Paulson was panicked. She begged the front desk clerk to call her boyfriend at another motel. Before the police arrived, she took a taxi to where her boyfriend was staying. Anchorage police officers found her there soon after. She was still wearing the handcuffs. The police took her to the police station. She told them everything that had happened. She described her attacker and the location of his house. The police went to question Robert Hansen. He denied everything. He told the police that Cindy Paulson was a sex worker trying to blackmail him. He said she was lying because he refused to pay her false extortion money. Hansen seemed calm and polite. He was a local baker and seemed respectable. He also had a friend, John Henning, who provided an alibi for him. The police initially believed Hansen's story. They did not arrest him. Cindy Paulson's case was not pursued further at that time. The investigation that eventually caught Robert Hansen did not start with Cindy Paulson. It began with bodies found in the wilderness. A detective with the Alaska State Troopers named Glenn Flotha was assigned to a series of murders where women's bodies were discovered in remote areas around Anchorage and Seward. The first body, called Eklutna Annie, was found in 1980. Another woman, Joanna Messina, was found near Seward later that year. In 1982, hunters found the body of Sherry Morrow near the Knik River. Detective Flotha believed one person was responsible for all these murders. Detective Flotha asked for help from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI. He sent details of the crimes to an FBI agent named John Douglas. Agent Douglas was an expert in creating criminal profiles. A profile is a description of what kind of person might commit a certain crime. After reviewing the case, Douglas sent back a profile. He said the killer was likely a white man who had a low opinion of himself. He would feel insecure, especially around women. He would be a skilled hunter and know the Alaska wilderness well. He might even own a plane to reach remote areas. The profile also mentioned the killer might keep souvenirs from his victims and could have a speech problem, like a stutter. This profile made Detective Flotha think of local hunters. He began checking records of men who owned small airplanes. One name that appeared was Robert Hansen. Hansen was a baker, but he was also a known hunter who owned a Piper Super Cub airplane. When Flotha looked deeper into Hansen's past, he found the arrest record from Cindy Paulson's attack in June 1983. He also found Hansen's older criminal record, which included assaults on women and the prison time in Iowa. Flotha realized Hansen matched the FBI profile perfectly. He was a hunter, a pilot, he stuttered, and he had a history of violence against women. Detective Flotha now focused on Hansen. He contacted the Anchorage Police Department. Together, they decided to get a search warrant. A search warrant is a paper from a judge that lets police look through a person's property. Based on the FBI profile and Cindy Paulson's statement, a judge agreed. On October 27, 1983, police officers went to Robert Hansen's home, his bakery, and the airport where he kept his plane. The search of Hansen's house was very thorough. In the attic, police found a hidden panel in a corner. Behind this panel, they discovered a collection of guns. One of these guns was a .223 caliber Ruger Mini 14 rifle. They also found pieces of jewelry that did not seem to belong to Hansen's wife. Later, these jewels were identified as belonging to some of the missing women. The most important piece of evidence was found in Hansen's bedroom. Behind the headboard of his bed, police found a map. It was an aeronautical chart of the wilderness around Anchorage. On this map, there were many small X marks written in pen. Police compared these marks to maps of where bodies had been found. Several of the X marks matched the locations exactly. Confronted with this evidence, Hansen first denied everything. But the evidence was strong. The police showed him the map and the jewelry. They told him they would test his rifle to see if it matched the bullets found in the victims. Over time, Hansen began to talk. He started to confess. He told the police he had killed many women. He said he would pick up women, often sex workers, and take them to his home. He would then fly them to the wilderness and kill them. He admitted to murdering at least 17 women. He agreed to show the police where he had left the bodies. To avoid the death penalty and to have his sentence served in a federal prison outside Alaska, Hansen made a deal with the prosecutors. This is called a plea bargain. In exchange for his full confession and for leading police to the bodies, he pleaded guilty to 4 of the murders. The 4 murders were those of Sherry Morrow, Joanna Messina, Paula Golding, and the unidentified woman known as Eklutna Annie. He also pleaded guilty to the kidnapping and assault of Cindy Paulson. Hansen took the police to many remote sites marked on his map. He helped them find the graves of 12 women. Some of these women had never been reported missing. Their families finally learned what had happened to them. Hansen's map had over 30 X marks. He did not confess to all of them. He refused to talk about 3 specific marks near Seward. Police believe these marks are for 2 missing women, Megan Emmerich and Mary Thill, whom Hansen always denied killing. A ballistics test was done on Hansen's .223 rifle. Ballistics is the science of matching guns to bullets. The test proved that the bullets found in victims like Sherry Morrow came from Hansen's rifle. This scientific evidence, along with his confession, made the case very strong. In February 1984, Robert Hansen was formally sentenced. Because of his many crimes, the judge gave him a sentence of 461 years in prison. There would be no chance for parole, meaning he would never be released. He was first sent to a federal prison in Pennsylvania. Later, he was moved back to Alaska to serve his time in the Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward. Hansen lived in prison for 30 years. His health slowly declined. In May 2014, he was moved to a medical prison unit in Anchorage. On August 21, 2014, Robert Hansen died at the Alaska Regional Hospital. He was 75 years old. The cause of death was listed as natural causes due to his long-term health problems. The victims' families were able to recover the remains of their loved ones because of Hansen's confessions, bringing a painful chapter to a close. Story 3. William George Bonin was born on January 8, 1947, in Willimantic, Connecticut. He was the second of 3 boys. His family life was very unstable. Both of his parents were alcoholics. His father had a violent temper, a trait some people linked to his service in World War II. He frequently hit his wife and his children. Bonin's mother suffered from strong and sudden mood swings. She often left her sons alone for long periods while she went out, sometimes to play bingo. When Bonin was 3 years old, his father gambled away the family's home. They were forced to move in with Bonin's maternal grandmother. Despite this chaotic home, the boys were raised in the Catholic faith. They were baptized and attended St. Mary's Catholic School. At school, teachers repeatedly reported that Bonin was aggressive. He bullied other students, skipped school, and caused other trouble. After one incident where he rode his bicycle into a group of girls, he was sent to a juvenile detention center for a short time. In September 1953, when Bonin was 6, he and his older brother were sent away to a strict Catholic convent school in Lowell, Massachusetts. Life at the convent was harsh. The staff enforced rules with severe physical punishment. Bonin later said the nuns would make him punch a fence as a punishment. Surprisingly, his behavior improved in this very structured environment, and school records noted he functioned well there. During his time at the convent, his parents never visited. Bonin became so worried that he started to believe they might have died. While at the convent, Bonin was bullied by other children. When he was 8 years old, an older boy sexually assaulted him. Bonin later explained that he had asked the older boy to tie his hands behind his back during the assault. He said this made him feel more secure and less frightened. In May 1955, Bonin returned to live with his parents, who had moved to a house owned by his grandfather in Mansfield, Connecticut. Back with his family, Bonin attended a local elementary school. Other children teased him and called him names. He began getting into more fights and acting out. He later recalled feeling ashamed during his early teen years because he was sexually attracted to younger children and to some of his male teachers. Neighbors remembered that Bonin and his brothers often looked dirty and hungry. One neighbor felt so sorry for them that she would give them meals and clean clothes. Bonin's parents provided little supervision. His mother often left the children with their maternal grandfather. She later admitted she suspected this grandfather, who had sexually abused her when she was a child, may have also molested her sons. When the parents were gone, Bonin's older brother, who had suffered the worst of their father's abuse, would often beat and bully Bonin and his younger brother. With no one watching him closely, Bonin began committing small crimes. He stole hubcaps, license plates, and metal tags from cars around town. In 1957, he was placed in a juvenile detention center for these thefts and other minor offenses. While in custody, Bonin was molested by an adult counselor. After his release, he began sexually touching his younger brother. After about 6 months, his brother told their mother, who then made Bonin sleep in a separate room. In later interviews, Bonin confessed to molesting other young boys and to exposing himself to a young girl during this period. In 1959, Bonin started middle school. He was good at math and science, but his other grades were average. In late 1960, his mother kicked his father out of the house, but they later got back together when his father found a good job in California. In early 1962, the whole family moved to a new home in Torrance, California. Bonin attended North High School in Torrance. He was seen as an outsider and did not make any close friends. His younger brother remembered him as being well behaved on the surface during these years. Bonin spent most of his free time alone at a local bowling alley. As a teenager, he developed a strong sexual interest in children, which he kept secret. This caused many arguments with his mother. He went on one date with a girl named Linda, mainly to please his mother, but showed little real interest. After dropping out of high school in 1966, Bonin molested several children in his neighborhood. His mother knew about these acts, but refused to fully acknowledge them. She warned him he would be arrested and prayed for him, which frustrated him. Eventually, she made him leave the family home. Bonin had no direction and often borrowed money from his parents. In December 1966, with his mother's encouragement, he joined the United States Air Force. He also became engaged to Linda, a decision pushed by his mother, who hoped marriage would stop his attraction to boys. During his engagement, Bonin told Linda he had repeated nightmares about the sexual assault and murder of a young woman. During his military service, Bonin got his high school equivalency diploma. He served as a cook in Alaska before being sent to Vietnam in 1968. There, he served as an aerial gunner on helicopters, logging over 700 hours of combat time. He later claimed his experiences in the war made him hate people. However, he also risked his life to save a wounded fellow soldier and was awarded a medal for his bravery. Bonin later confessed that during his service he had sexual encounters with young girls and other soldiers, and that he sexually assaulted 2 soldiers under his command at gunpoint. Bonin received an honorable discharge and returned home in October 1968. He found that Linda, who had given birth to their son, had left him and married another man. He took a job as a gas station attendant and moved back in with his parents in Downey, California. His family noticed he had changed after the war, but he would not explain how or why. After returning from the war and moving back in with his parents, Bonin began using his mother's car to drive around. On November 17, 1968, he picked up a 14-year-old boy named Billy Jones who was walking in Arcadia, California. Bonin offered him a ride home. While driving, Bonin began asking the boy questions about homosexuality. The boy became frightened and tried to get out of the car. Bonin drove to a shopping center parking lot instead. There, he handcuffed the boy, raped him, and hit him hard enough to knock him unconscious. Afterward, Bonin dropped the dazed boy off at a park. The boy went home and told his mother, who immediately called the police. Just over a week later, on November 26th, Bonin picked up a 17-year-old hitchhiker named John Treadwell. Again, Bonin started asking about homosexuality. He then sped up the car, took out a handgun, and drove to a secluded area. He raped Treadwell and beat him with a tire iron. Before letting him go, Bonin threatened him, saying he had friends who would get revenge if Treadwell went to the police. On December 4th, a 17-year-old boy named Alan Pruitt reported a similar attack to police. A man with a gun had offered him a ride, handcuffed him, and sexually assaulted him in the car. On New Year's Day, 1969, Bonin offered a ride to a 12-year-old boy named Lawrence Bretman. He ignored the boy's pleas to be let go, threatened him with a gun, forced him to perform a sex act, and then robbed him. He warned the boy he would be killed if he reported the crime. By mid-January 1969, local police were looking for a serial rapist matching Bonin's description. On January 28th, a policewoman in El Segundo saw Bonin in his mother's car with a 16-year-old runaway who looked frightened. Noticing Bonin matched the suspect profile, she searched him, handcuffed him, and arrested him. Bonin told her she should lock him up and that he was not in control of his actions. He was charged with kidnapping, sodomy, and child molestation for the attacks on 5 young males. In March 1969, Bonin underwent psychiatric exams. Doctors determined he was a sexual psychopath with little control over his impulses. He confessed to being molested as a child. In May, he told a probation officer he felt guilty, but also wanted to start a family. He said his time in Vietnam contributed to his behavior. He was declared a mentally disordered sex offender and sent to a state hospital for treatment in June 1969. Bonin was released from the state hospital in June 1974 after doctors decided he was no longer a danger. He got a job as a truck driver, but was fired months later for crashing a trailer. On the night of September 8, 1975, he was driving around looking for young boys. He saw 14-year-old David McVicker hitchhiking and offered him a ride. Once McVicker was in the car, Bonin asked if he had ever had sex with a man. When the boy said no and asked to get out, Bonin sped up, pulled a gun, and drove him to a deserted field. He forced McVicker to undress, beat him, and raped him. Bonin then began strangling the boy with his own t-shirt. McVicker begged for his life. Bonin suddenly stopped, apologized, and began talking normally again. He drove McVicker home, telling him on the way, "You know what? You're an alright guy. I was going to kill you, but I want to come back for you and use you again." McVicker called his mother, who called the police. Bonin was arrested in October 1975. When arrested, he told officers, "Next time there won't be any more witnesses." He pleaded guilty to rape and attempted kidnapping and was sent to prison. He was released on parole in October 1978. After his release, Bonin moved into an apartment complex near his parents. He became friends with a neighbor named Everett Fraser, who hosted parties with drugs, alcohol, and young men. Through Fraser, Bonin met 2 men who would become his accomplices: Vernon Butts, a 21-year-old with a history of drug abuse and crime, and Gregory Miley, an 18-year-old with a very low IQ who saw Bonin as a father figure. Bonin and Butts became lovers. They often talked about death, and Butts hosted mystery parties where people would search for murder-related items like an ice pick. Bonin started committing murders. He usually cruised freeways on Friday and Saturday nights looking for victims. He targeted young male hitchhikers or teenagers walking alone, typically between 12 and 19 years old. He drove a Ford Econoline van. To prevent escapes, he had removed the inside door handles on the passenger and rear doors. He kept handcuffs, rope, wire, knives, pliers, and a tire iron in the van. His method was consistent. He would lure a victim into the van with an offer of a ride, money, or drugs. He would then overpower them, bind their hands and feet with wire or cords, and sexually assault them. He would beat and torture them. Finally, he would kill them by strangling them with their own t-shirt, often using a tire iron to twist the shirt tighter like a tourniquet. Afterward, he would dump the body near a freeway, often in a different county from where the boy was abducted to confuse police. He sometimes had help from Butts, Miley, or others. The first murder he was charged for happened on May 28, 1979. 13-year-old Thomas Lundgren left his house to meet a man who promised to take photos for a skateboard magazine. Lundgren's body was found later that day. He had been brutally beaten, strangled, stabbed, and his genitals had been cut off. Bonin was assisted by Vernon Butts. On August 4, 1979, Bonin and Butts picked up 17-year-old Mark Shelton. They offered him money for sex. They drove to a remote area called Cajon Pass. There, they both sexually assaulted Shelton, beat him, and violated him with a stick, which put him into fatal shock. They left his body by the side of a gravel road. The next night, August 5th, Bonin and Butts picked up 17-year-old Marcus Grabs, a German student hitchhiking. They bound him with wire, drove him to Bonin's home, raped him, and stabbed him 77 times. They dumped his body in a creek. On August 27th, Bonin and Butts picked up 15-year-old Donald Hayden. When Hayden became frightened, Bonin beat him, bound him, tortured him, and strangled him. Butts performed a sex act on the body after death. They dumped it at a construction site. Bonin continued this pattern with more victims throughout 1979 and 1980. He sometimes worked alone and sometimes with accomplices. He killed 17-year-old David Murillo on September 9, 1979, with Butts' help. He killed 18-year-old Robert Wiersteck on September 17 with Butts' help. In early November 1979, he and Butts killed an unidentified teenage boy, stabbing him with an ice pick. He killed 17-year-old Frank Fox alone on November 30th. He killed 15-year-old John Kilpatrick on December 9th. In early 1980, he killed 16-year-old Michael McDonald. On February 3, 1980, Bonin took Gregory Miley with him specifically to kill someone. They picked up 15-year-old Charles Miranda. After having sex with him, Bonin told Miley they had to kill him so he couldn't identify them. They beat and strangled Miranda. Just minutes after dumping his body, Bonin wanted to kill another. They found 12-year-old James McCabe waiting for a bus. They lured him into the van with a promise of a ride to Disneyland and marijuana. They drove him to a remote area where Bonin raped him, beat him with a tire iron, and strangled him. Bonin was arrested for a parole violation in February 1980, but released in early March. He immediately resumed killing. On March 14th, he killed 18-year-old Ronald Gatlin, stabbing him with an ice pick. On March 21st, he killed 14-year-old Glenn Barker and 15-year-old Russell Rue on the same day, strangling them both. Around this time, Bonin met a 17-year-old named William Pugh. He gave Pugh a ride and described in detail how he enjoyed kidnapping, torturing, and strangling hitchhikers. He explained how to avoid getting caught. He told Pugh he wasn't killing him that night only because people had seen them together earlier. Later, on March 25th, Bonin took Pugh with him to pick up 15-year-old Harry Turner. Bonin bound and raped Turner, then ordered Pugh to beat him. After Pugh did, Bonin strangled Turner to death. Bonin killed 16-year-old Stephen Wood on April 10th. On April 29th, with Vernon Butts' help, he killed 19-year-old Darren Kendrick. They lured Kendrick to Butts' apartment, bound him, poured a chemical down his throat, strangled him, and drove an ice pick into his ear. On May 12th, Bonin killed a 17-year-old acquaintance named Lawrence Sharp because he was tired of him. He strangled him and dumped his body behind a gas station. On May 19th, he killed 14-year-old Sean King alone, strangled him, and buried his body in a remote area. By late May 1980, the murders were getting major media attention, dubbed the Freeway Killer Case. Police from different counties had formed a task force. William Pugh, who was now in jail on an auto theft charge, heard a news report about the murders and told a counselor he knew who was doing it. He described the method Bonin had explained to him. Police interviewed Pugh, and he pointed them to Bonin. At the same time, David McVicker, the boy Bonin had spared in 1975, also contacted police with his suspicions about Bonin. On June 1, 1980, Bonin took a new acquaintance, an 18-year-old named James Monroe, with him to find a victim. They picked up 18-year-old Stephen Wells. They took him to Bonin's house, had sex, and then Bonin paid Wells to let himself be tied up. When Wells realized the danger, he struggled. Bonin told Monroe they were going to kill him. They gagged Wells, beat him, and Bonin strangled him. They put the body in a box, loaded it into the van, and drove to Vernon Butts' apartment to show him. Butts suggested a dumping spot. They left Wells' body near an abandoned gas station. Police, now suspicious of Bonin, began watching him. On June 11th, undercover officers followed his van as he drove through Hollywood. They saw him repeatedly try to lure young boys into the vehicle. He finally succeeded with a 17-year-old. The police followed until Bonin stopped at a service station. They heard screams and banging from inside the van. They rushed the van and forced the doors open. Inside, they found Bonin raping the teenager, who was handcuffed and bound. They arrested Bonin at the scene. After police arrested Bonin in his van on June 11, 1980, they searched the vehicle thoroughly. Inside, they found handcuffs, ropes, coils of wire, knives, a tire iron, and other tools. The inside door handles on the passenger side and rear doors were missing, preventing anyone from escaping. Forensic tests later revealed bloodstains in the van. In the glove compartment, investigators discovered a scrapbook of newspaper clippings about the Freeway Killer murders. At Bonin's house, they found more evidence linking him to the crimes. Bonin was initially charged with the rape of the teenage boy found in his van. He was also held as a suspect in the murder of Charles Miranda. While in jail, Bonin was shown a letter from the mother of Sean King, one of the victims, begging for information about her son's body. After reading it, Bonin decided to confess. He told detectives he would show them where King was buried, not to ease the mother's pain, but because the trip was long and he thought the police would buy him a hamburger. Over several days, Bonin gave detailed confessions to the police. He described abducting, raping, torturing, and killing 21 young men and boys. He showed no remorse but was deeply embarrassed about being caught. His confession included specific details that only the killer would know. He named Vernon Butts as his main accomplice and said Gregory Miley and James Monroe had helped with some murders. Based on Bonin's confession, police got a warrant to search Vernon Butts' apartment on July 25, 1980. They found evidence linking him to the murders. Butts was arrested and charged with participating in 6 killings. At first, Butts said he was innocent, but he soon confessed. He claimed he participated out of fear that Bonin would kill him if he refused. He admitted to restraining victims and to sexually assaulting some of them. Gregory Miley was arrested in Texas on August 22, 1980. A friend had recorded a phone call in which Miley talked about his role in 2 murders, which supported Bonin's confession. Miley was charged with the murders of Charles Miranda and James McCabe. James Monroe, who had fled to Michigan after Bonin's arrest, was tracked down and arrested on July 31st. He was charged with the murder of Stephen Wells. William Pugh, who had been with Bonin during the murder of Harry Turner, was also arrested. He agreed to testify against Bonin. In January 1981, while waiting for trial in his cell, Vernon Butts committed suicide by hanging himself with a towel. He had been depressed and was worried about his family hearing the graphic details of his crimes. With Butts dead, the charges against Bonin for the murders of Mark Shelton, Robert Wyrostek, and the unidentified November 1979 victim were dropped, as Butts's testimony was needed for those cases. James Monroe and Gregory Miley both agreed to plead guilty and testify against Bonin in exchange for not receiving the death penalty. Monroe pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for his role in the killing of Stephen Wells. Miley pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Miranda and McCabe. William Pugh pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter for his role in Harry Turner's death. Bonin's first trial began in Los Angeles County in November 1981. He was charged with 12 murders that occurred in that county. The prosecutor, Sterling Norris, described Bonin's crimes as a group sport and sought the death penalty. Monroe and Miley testified, giving horrific details of the murders they participated in. Bonin's defense attorneys argued that his childhood of severe abuse had damaged his mind and that he could not control his actions. They called a doctor who testified about the effects of childhood trauma. The prosecution called its own expert, Dr. Park Dietz, who testified that Bonin was a sexual sadist, but that his actions were planned, not impulsive, and that he could control himself. A reporter, David Lopez, also testified. He said Bonin had given him interviews in jail, boasting about the murders and saying he killed because he enjoyed the sound of kids dying. The jury found Bonin guilty of 10 of the 12 murders on January 6, 1982. They found him not guilty of 2 killings, including Sean King's, because of the deal he made when leading police to the body. The jury decided the special circumstances of multiple murders and robbery were true, and they recommended the death penalty. In March 1982, the judge formally sentenced William Bonin to death in the gas chamber at San Quentin Prison. Bonin's second trial was held in Orange County in 1983 for 4 more murders. The main evidence was forensic. Carpet fibers found on several victims matched the carpet in Bonin's van exactly. Again, Monroe and Miley testified. The jury found Bonin guilty of all 4 murders in August 1983, and after a separate penalty phase, recommended the death penalty again. The judge sentenced him to death for these crimes as well. Bonin was sent to death row at San Quentin. On death row, Bonin painted, wrote short stories, and became friends with other notorious killers. He filed many appeals against his convictions and sentences. His new lawyers argued that his original attorney did a poor job by not focusing enough on his mental problems and abusive childhood. All of his appeals were rejected by higher courts. The courts ruled that while there were some minor errors in his trials, they did not change the overall fairness or the guilty verdicts. In his final days, Bonin gave a radio interview. He said he had made peace with his execution. His only regret, he said, was not pursuing a professional bowling career when he was younger. He stated that he believed the death penalty was wrong. He did not take responsibility for his actions, claiming he had no control over them. On February 23, 1996, William Bonin was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin Prison. He was the first person executed by lethal injection in California. For his last meal, he ordered 2 large pizzas, 3 pints of ice cream, and 3 six-packs of Coca-Cola. In a final written statement, he did not apologize. He wrote that the death penalty sends the wrong message, and that young people act based on what they see others do. He was pronounced dead at 12:13 a.m. Some relatives of his victims witnessed the execution. After his death, Bonin's family did not claim his body. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered at sea. It was later discovered that his mother had continued to receive his Social Security disability payments by mistake for years after he was imprisoned, and she had to pay the money back. James Monroe was sentenced to 15 years to life for second-degree murder. He remains in prison and has been denied parole multiple times. Gregory Miley was sentenced to 25 years to life for his 2 murder convictions. He died in prison in May 2016 after being attacked by another inmate. William Pugh served less than 4 years of his 6-year sentence for voluntary manslaughter and was released in 1985. David McVicker, the young man Bonin spared in 1975, witnessed the execution. He said it brought him a sense of closure, though he was haunted by his ordeal for many years. The series of murders committed by William Bonin, using the methods he described and with the help of his accomplices, came to a final end with his execution. The long and violent trail of the freeway killer was closed, and the families of his victims began their slow journey toward a painful peace. Story 4. Patrick Wayne Kearney was born on September 24, 1939, in East Los Angeles, California. He was the oldest of 3 sons in a middle-class family. His father was a police officer for the Los Angeles Police Department. His mother was a homemaker. The family lived on the east side of Los Angeles. When Patrick was about 11 years old, his family moved to a town called Reseda. They lived on Runnymede Street. Patrick started attending Reseda Elementary School. He was a thin child and was often sick. Other children bullied him frequently. They called him names and beat him up. This made him very unhappy. As a teenager, Patrick became more quiet and kept to himself. He spent a lot of time alone. He began to have violent daydreams. In these daydreams, he would hurt people who had been mean to him. He also started having unusual sexual thoughts. When he was 13 years old, he had a sexual experience with the family dog. This is something he later told the police. When Patrick was 13, his father bought him a .22 caliber rifle. His father wanted to make his son tougher. His father taught him how to shoot and how to kill farm animals like pigs and chickens. The family then moved to Willcox, Arizona. His father got a new job as a salesman for a travel agency. Patrick went to Willcox Middle School. In Arizona, he was still bullied by other children. During this time, he learned to speak Spanish very well. After some time, the family moved back to California. They lived in Redondo Beach. Patrick finished high school in 1957. After graduation, his family moved to Dallas, Texas. Patrick worked at a few temporary jobs there, but he soon returned to California by himself. He moved to Torrance and signed up for classes at El Camino Community College. He did not finish these classes. In 1958, Patrick joined the United States Air Force. He was stationed in Texas. While in the Air Force, he met a man named David Hill through a friend. They became friends. Patrick left the Air Force with an honorable discharge in 1961. After his discharge, he convinced David Hill to move to Long Beach, California, to live with him. By 1962, Patrick and David Hill were not getting along well. David Hill moved back to Texas to live with his ex-wife. During this period, Patrick began to meet other men for casual sexual encounters. He also got married briefly around this time, but the marriage ended in divorce. After the divorce, he found a job as an engineer at a company called Hughes Aircraft. He was good at his job, and his boss saw him as a model worker. Patrick learned how to meet men easily. He often went to San Diego and Tijuana, Mexico, to find partners. He used his ability to speak Spanish to connect with people. He lived a quiet life and did not have many friends. A local grocery store owner noticed that Patrick would often buy butcher knives. Patrick would carefully examine the knives and ask questions about the quality of the steel. The store owner thought Patrick was a loner and seemed very quiet. Patrick Kearney began his crimes shortly after his friend David Hill moved back to Texas. He later told police that his first murder happened in the spring of 1962. He picked up a 19-year-old male hitchhiker. Patrick convinced the young man to ride on his motorcycle to a lonely area outside of Indio, California. When they arrived, Patrick shot the hitchhiker in the head with a .22 caliber gun. After the man was dead, Patrick sexually assaulted the body. He left the body there. It is not known if this body was ever found. Patrick said this victim had a younger cousin, aged 16, who started asking about the missing man. Patrick claimed he then picked up this 16-year-old cousin. He drove him to the same lonely area and killed him in the same way. Several years later, Patrick and David Hill had reconciled and were living together in a house on Van Buren Avenue in Culver City. Around Christmas of 1968, Patrick committed a murder in this home. He met a young man named George in San Diego and offered him a ride. Patrick drove George to his house. Soon after George entered the house, Patrick shot him in the head. He dragged the body to the bathroom. He sexually assaulted the body. Then, he used a sharp hobby knife called an X-Acto knife to cut the body apart in the bathtub. He also removed the bullet from George's head so it could not be traced. He buried the pieces of the body in a shallow hole behind his garage. He did not kill anyone again for over a year because he was scared the police would investigate George's disappearance. As time passed, Patrick developed a clear method for his crimes. He usually found his victims in one of two ways. He would pick up young male hitchhikers along the freeways in Southern California. Or he would meet young men in gay bars. He used his Volkswagen car or his truck for this. He would offer them a ride or suggest they go somewhere together. His method for killing became very organized. While driving, he would talk to the victim. When he felt the moment was right, he would take out a small .22 caliber Derringer pistol. He held the gun in his right hand. While still driving with his left hand, he would shoot the victim in the side of the head, near the temple. He made sure to keep driving at a normal speed so other drivers would not notice anything wrong. The victim would die instantly and slump over in the passenger seat. Patrick would then drive to a secluded area. He would stop the car and sexually assault the victim's body. After this, he would often take the body to his home. He would place the body in his bathtub. Using a hacksaw, he would cut the body into pieces. He sometimes washed the body parts to remove blood and fingerprints. He would put the pieces into large, heavy-duty plastic trash bags. He bought these bags at the grocery store. He then drove around and dumped the bags in different locations. He chose places like landfills, freeway ditches, or lonely desert roads. Sometimes he dumped bodies in the forest. In the desert, animals would sometimes find and eat the remains. Patrick did not feel remorse. He later said that beating the bodies after death helped him release anger. He said some victims looked like the boys who bullied him when he was a child. His crimes became more frequent. By 1974, he was killing people almost every month. His victims were almost all boys and young men. The youngest was a 5-year-old boy named Ronald Dean Smith. In August 1974, Patrick saw the boy walking alone near a park in Lenox. He offered him a ride. The boy said he was hungry, so Patrick took him to a McDonald's. Later, Patrick suffocated the boy. He dumped the body near a highway in Riverside County. When the body was found, the boy's underwear was around his ankles, and there was evidence of sexual assault. Another victim was 13-year-old Michael McGee, killed in June 1976. Patrick picked him up hitchhiking. Michael talked about getting into trouble with the law. This talk made Patrick nervous. He thought Michael might be a threat. Patrick shot him without warning. He later told police, "I disposed of the body. You aren't going to find him." The last known victim was an 8-year-old boy named Merle Chance. In April 1977, Patrick saw the boy riding his bicycle near Patrick's workplace. He smothered the boy. He took the body home overnight and dumped it in the Angeles National Forest the next day. The victim that would eventually connect Patrick to the police was a 17-year-old named John LeMay. On March 13, 1977, LeMay went to Patrick's house to see David Hill, whom he had met at a gym. David was not home. Patrick invited LeMay inside to wait. While LeMay was watching television, Patrick got his pistol and shot LeMay in the back of the head. He then dismembered the body and dumped the bags in the desert. The plastic bags containing John LeMay's remains were found in the desert on March 18, 1977, 5 days after he was killed. The bags were sealed with nylon tape. Investigators found very small green fibers stuck to this tape. Police learned that LeMay had told a neighbor he was going to visit a man named Dave at a specific address in Redondo Beach. This address was the home of Patrick Kearney and David Hill. Deputies went to the house to speak to the men. When they arrived, Kearney and Hill asked them to wait outside for a moment so they could make themselves presentable. While waiting, one of the deputies used a small clip to take a few fibers from the green carpet just inside the front door. They wanted to compare these fibers to the ones found on the tape. After the deputies were let inside, they told Kearney and Hill about LeMay's death. Kearney told them that he and Hill were homosexuals. He said they were afraid because there seemed to be a killer targeting gay men. He claimed that both he and Hill had known LeMay and had sexual relationships with him over the past 2 years. The green fibers from the carpet were sent to a lab. The lab report showed they matched the green fibers found on the tape from the trash bags. This match gave the police probable cause to search the house more thoroughly. On May 3rd, deputies returned to the home with a search warrant. They collected more carpet fiber samples. They also asked both Kearney and Hill for samples of their pubic hair. During this search, the police found a hacksaw. The hacksaw had dried blood on it. The forensic tests provided several important matches. The pubic hair found on John LeMay's body matched Patrick Kearney's pubic hair sample. The blood on the hacksaw was the same type as John LeMay's blood. The police now had strong physical evidence linking Kearney to the murder. Warrants for the arrest of Patrick Kearney and David Hill were issued on June 3, 1977. However, by the time the warrants were issued, the men were gone. In late May, Kearney had mailed a letter of resignation and his work security badge to Hughes Aircraft. He and Hill had driven to El Paso, Texas. The police began a search for them. Investigators contacted their families. The families agreed to help persuade the two men to return to California and surrender. On July 1, 1977, Patrick Kearney walked into the Riverside County Sheriff's Office. He pointed to his own wanted poster on the wall and told the deputy he was the man they were looking for. David Hill surrendered separately. They were both held on a $500,000 bond. Faced with the strong physical evidence, Patrick Kearney agreed to talk to detectives. He confessed to killing John LeMay. He then began confessing to many other murders. Over several interviews, he confessed to a total of 35 murders. He gave detectives specific details about how he killed his victims and where he dumped many of the bodies. He led police to the backyard of his old Culver City home, where they dug up the skeleton of the victim he called George. David Hill was questioned extensively, but was eventually cleared of any involvement in the murders. He was released. To avoid the death penalty, Patrick Kearney's lawyer made a deal with prosecutors. Kearney would plead guilty to murder in exchange for a life sentence. He was formally charged with 21 counts of murder, based on the cases where the evidence was strongest. In court, he pleaded guilty to all 21 counts. The judge sentenced him to 21 life sentences in prison. The police believed his confessions about the other killings were true, but they did not have enough physical evidence to charge him for those. Patrick Kearney was sent to the California State Prison System. As of today, he remains in prison at the Mule Creek State Prison. He has been repeatedly denied parole. The families of the victims were spared a long and painful trial because of his guilty pleas, but they have had to live with the loss of their sons and brothers for decades. Patrick Wayne Kearney will spend the rest of his life in prison for his crimes. Story 5. Dean Arnold Corll was born on December 24, 1939, in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He was the first child of Arnold and Mary Corll. His father was a strict man. His mother was very protective of Dean and his younger brother, Stanley. His parents fought often. Their marriage was not happy. They divorced in 1946, when Dean was 7 years old. After the divorce, Mary Corll sold the family home. She moved with her sons to a trailer in Memphis, Tennessee. Dean's father had joined the Air Force after the divorce. Mary moved to Memphis so her sons could still see their father sometimes. Dean was a quiet and serious boy. He did not often play with other children. He could be very kind, but he was also very sensitive. He did not like being criticized or rejected. When Dean was 7, he became very ill with rheumatic fever. The doctors did not diagnose it at first. They only discovered it in 1950 when they found he had a heart murmur. Because of this heart condition, Dean was told to avoid physical education classes in school. He was not allowed to play sports or do strenuous activity. Dean's parents tried to fix their marriage. They got married again in 1950 and moved the family to Pasadena, Texas, near Houston. However, the reconciliation did not last. They divorced for a second time in 1953. Mary kept custody of Dean and Stanley. The boys still saw their father regularly. After this divorce, life was harder. Mary and her sons lived in a trailer on a farm. Mary worked low-paying jobs to support them. Soon after, Mary married a clock salesman named Jake West. The family moved to the small town of Vidor, Texas. Dean's half-sister, Joyce, was born there. To make money, Dean's mother and stepfather started a small candy company in their garage. Dean worked for this family business even while he was in school. He and his brother would operate the candy machines and pack the sweets. His stepfather would then drive to Houston to sell them. From 1954 to 1958, Dean attended Vidor High School. He was a well-behaved student who got average grades. He was still something of a loner, but he did sometimes go on dates with girls. His main interest in school was the brass band, where he played the trombone. Dean graduated high school in 1958. His family then moved to the outskirts of Houston, so their candy business could be closer to the city where they sold most of their product. They opened a new shop called Pecan Prince. In 1960, Dean's mother asked him to move to Indiana to live with his grandmother. He lived there for almost 2 years and had a close relationship with a local girl. She later asked him to marry her, but he said no. Dean returned to Houston in 1962 to help with the family candy business, which had moved to a neighborhood called Houston Heights. He eventually moved into his own apartment above the candy shop. In 1963, his mother divorced Jake West. She started a new candy company called the Coral Candy Company and made Dean the vice president. That same year, a teenage boy who worked at the candy company complained to Dean's mother. The boy said Dean had made sexual advances toward him. In response, Dean's mother fired the teenage boy. In August 1964, Dean was drafted into the United States Army. He did his basic training in Louisiana and was trained as a radio repairman in Georgia. His final posting was in Texas. His military record was clean, but he reportedly hated being in the Army. He asked for an early release, saying he was needed to run the family business. The Army agreed, and he was honorably discharged in June 1965 after serving for 10 months. After leaving the Army, Dean returned to Houston Heights and went back to work as vice president of the Coral Candy Company. Around 1965, the company moved to a small house across the street from an elementary school. Dean was known to give free candy to the neighborhood children, especially teenage boys. Because of this, some people called him the Candy Man. He set up a pool table at the back of the candy factory. Local teenagers, mostly boys, would gather there in the evenings to play pool and listen to music. In 1967, Dean met a 12-year-old boy named David Brooks. David was one of the many children who came for free candy. David came from a broken home and saw Dean as a father figure. A sexual relationship slowly developed between them. Starting in 1969, Dean would pay David money or give him gifts to perform sexual acts. By 1970, David Brooks had dropped out of high school. He moved back to Houston and began to treat Dean's apartment as a second home. Around this time, Dean's mother and half-sister moved to Colorado after the candy business failed. Dean stayed in Houston. He got a job as an electrician at the Houston Lighting and Power Company to support himself. He worked there until the day he died. Dean Coral began killing teenage boys in 1970. His first known victim was an 18-year-old college student named Jeffrey Conan. On September 25, 1970, Conan was hitchhiking from Austin to his parents' home in Houston. He was last seen being dropped off at a street corner in Houston. Coral likely offered him a ride. At that time, Coral lived in an apartment complex where he had just paid rent. Conan accepted the ride and was never seen alive again. His body was later found buried on a beach. He had been strangled. Shortly after this murder, David Brooks walked into Coral's apartment unannounced. He saw Coral sexually assaulting two teenage boys who were handcuffed to a bed. Coral promised Brooks a car in return for his silence. Brooks agreed. Coral later bought him a green Chevrolet Corvette. Coral then told Brooks he had killed those two boys. He offered Brooks $200 for every boy Brooks could lure to his apartment. On December 13, 1970, Brooks used this offer. He lured two 14-year-old boys, James Glass and Danny Yates, away from a church event. He brought them to an apartment Coral had rented. The boys were handcuffed to Coral's bed, sexually assaulted, and then strangled. Their bodies were buried in a storage shed, often called a boat shed, that Coral had rented for this purpose. 6 weeks later, on January 30th, 1971, Brooks and Coral were driving in Coral's van. They saw two brothers, Donald and Jerry Waldrop, walking home. The brothers were 15 and 13 years old. Coral and Brooks offered them a ride. The boys got into the van. They were driven to Coral's apartment, where they were also assaulted and strangled. Their bodies were buried in the same boat shed. Over the next 2 years, Coral, with help from Brooks, abducted and killed more teenagers. The victims were usually boys between 13 and 20 years old from the Houston Heights area. The method was often the same. A boy would be offered a ride, invited to a party, or given drugs or alcohol. He would be taken to Coral's current apartment. There, he would be overpowered, handcuffed or tied up, and sexually assaulted. Finally, the victim was killed, most often by strangulation or with a .22 caliber pistol. The body was then wrapped in plastic sheets and buried. Coral used several burial sites. He used the rented boat shed in southwest Houston. He also used beaches on the Bolivar Peninsula and in Jefferson County. Another site was near a family cabin at Lake Sam Rayburn in East Texas. Sometimes, before killing a victim, Coral would force him to call his parents. The boy would say he was okay and was leaving town to explain his disappearance. In late 1971, David Brooks introduced Coral to a 15-year-old boy named Elmer Wayne Henley. Henley was from the Heights and knew many of the local boys. Coral saw use for Henley. He told Henley he was part of a white slavery ring that sold boys in Dallas. He offered Henley the same deal he gave Brooks, $200 for every boy Henley brought to him. Henley, who came from a poor family, eventually agreed. The first abduction Henley helped with happened in early 1972. Henley and Coral picked up a boy from a street corner. They told him they were going to smoke marijuana. At the apartment, Henley tricked the boy into putting on handcuffs. Then Coral took over. Henley left, believing the boy would be sold. He later learned Coral had killed him. On March 24, 1972, Henley helped Coral and Brooks abduct an 18-year-old named Frank Aguirre, who was an acquaintance. They persuaded Aguirre to come to Coral's apartment to drink beer. Once inside, Coral handcuffed him. Henley later claimed he tried to stop Coral from killing Aguirre, but Coral refused. Coral explained that he raped, tortured, and killed the boys, and he would do the same to Aguirre. Henley then helped bury Aguirre's body on the beach. Henley continued to help Coral despite knowing the truth. The killings became more frequent and brutal. Coral constructed a large plywood board, often called a torture board. He would tie victims to this board to assault and torture them before killing them. One method to trap victims involved Henley handcuffing himself, then showing the boy how to escape using a hidden key. He would then dare the boy to try it. When the boy put the handcuffs on, he would be trapped. Another method was simply using force, with Coral and his accomplices overpowering the victim. In the spring of 1973, Coral moved into a house in Pasadena that had belonged to his father. The killings intensified. Between June and August 1973, Coral killed at least 6 more boys. David Brooks had gotten married and was less involved, so Henley became the main person helping Coral find victims. The end came on the night of August 7, 1973. Henley had picked up two friends, a young man named Tim Curley and a 15-year-old girl named Rhonda Williams. He took them to Coral's house in Pasadena to drink and sniff paint fumes. Coral was angry that Henley had brought a girl to his house. In the early morning of August 8th, after everyone had fallen asleep, Coral handcuffed Henley and tied up Curley and Williams. When Henley woke up, he was handcuffed. Coral told Henley he had ruined everything by bringing a girl. Coral said he was going to kill all three of them. He kicked Williams and carried both her and Curley into his bedroom, tying them to his torture board. Coral untied Henley after Henley begged and promised to help kill the others. Coral gave Henley a knife and told him to cut off Williams's clothes. As Coral began to assault Curley, Williams whispered to Henley, "Are you going to do anything about it?" Henley then picked up Coral's .22 caliber pistol. He shouted at Coral, "You've gone far enough, Dean." Coral walked toward him and said, "Kill me, Wayne." Henley fired, hitting Coral in the head. The bullet did not kill him. Coral kept coming. Henley fired several more times, hitting Coral in the shoulder and back. Coral stumbled into the hallway and died. Henley then untied Curley and Williams. The three teenagers decided to call the police. At 8:24 a.m., Henley called the Pasadena police. He said, "Y'all better come here right now. I just killed a man." He gave them the address. When police arrived, they found the three teenagers outside and Coral's body inside the house. They took Henley, Curley, and Williams to the police station. During questioning, Henley was not just talking about killing Coral. He started talking about other boys. He told the detectives that for years, he and David Brooks had helped Coral kidnap, rape, and murder teenage boys. He said bodies were buried in a boat shed, on beaches, and near a lake. The police were initially skeptical. They thought it was just a drug-related fight, but Henley gave them the names of missing boys. He offered to show them where the bodies were buried. After Elmer Wayne Henley's call to the police on August 8th, 1973, officers arrived at Dean Coral's house. They found Coral's body and took Henley, Tim Curley, and Rhonda Williams to the police station. At first, the police thought Coral's death was the result of a fight among people using drugs. However, during questioning, Henley began talking about many other murders. He said he and David Brooks had helped Coral kidnap, rape, and kill teenage boys for years. He said the bodies were buried in a boat shed, on beaches, and near a lake. The police were doubtful, but Henley gave specific names of boys who had been reported missing. Because of this, detectives decided to listen to him more carefully. Henley agreed to lead them to the burial sites. First, he took them to the rented boat shed in southwest Houston. Police began digging in the soft dirt inside the shed. They soon found a body wrapped in plastic. They kept digging and found more bodies. By the end of the first day, they had found several victims. The search was stopped for the night and continued the next morning. In total, they found 17 bodies buried in that shed. The victims had been strangled or shot. They showed signs of terrible torture and sexual assault. Some had objects forced into their bodies. Many had cloth gags stuffed deep in their mouths, held in place with tape. On August 9th, Henley gave a full, written confession. He admitted to helping Coral with many abductions and said he had personally killed some of the boys. That same day, he led police to Lake Sam Rayburn, where Coral's family had a cabin. There, police dug up 4 more bodies buried in shallow graves. Meanwhile, David Brooks heard about the discoveries on the news. On the evening of August 8th, he had gone to the police station with his father. He first denied knowing anything about the murders. But after Henley's detailed confession and the finding of the bodies, Brooks also confessed on August 10th. He admitted to luring boys for Coral and helping to bury bodies, but he claimed he never personally killed anyone. He then led police to High Island Beach, where more bodies were buried. Over several days, police recovered bodies from 3 main locations: the boat shed, High Island Beach, and Lake Sam Rayburn. The final count was 27 victims. This made it the worst series of murders in American history at that time. The families of the missing boys were horrified and angry. Many parents said they had reported their sons missing, but the police had done little. The police had often listed the teenagers as runaways and did not believe a crime had occurred. The parents felt the police should have noticed a pattern of boys disappearing from the same neighborhood. The legal process began quickly. A grand jury was assembled to hear the evidence. Henley and Brooks were both charged with multiple counts of murder. Henley was not charged with killing Coral, as the prosecutors decided he had acted in self-defense. Elmer Wayne Henley was tried first. His trial began in July 1974. The prosecution presented evidence from the burial sites, the torture board, and Henley's own confession. Henley's defense lawyers did not call any witnesses. The jury found him guilty of 6 murders. He was sentenced to 6 terms of 99 years in prison, to be served one after the other. Henley appealed and got a new trial in 1979. He was found guilty again, but this time his sentences were set to run at the same time, meaning he would be eligible for parole after serving a portion of the 99 years. David Brooks was tried in February 1975. He was charged with the murder of one victim, William Ray Lawrence. Brooks's lawyer argued that Coral and Henley were the real killers and that Brooks was just a bystander. The jury did not believe this. They found Brooks guilty after a short deliberation. He was sentenced to life in prison. In the years that followed, scientists used DNA technology to identify more of the victims. Some bodies had been misidentified in the 1970s. By 2011, through DNA testing, all but one of the 27 victims had been positively identified. One boy, known only as Swimsuit Boy from the clothing he was buried in, remains unnamed. Investigators still work to identify him. David Brooks died in prison in May 2020 from complications of COVID-19. Elmer Wayne Henley remains in a Texas prison. He has been denied parole many times, most recently in 2025. The case left a deep scar on the city of Houston, especially the Heights neighborhood, where dozens of families lost their sons to a killer who operated for years with the help of teenage accomplices. The story finally ended with the killers imprisoned and all but one victim given back his name. Story 6. Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. was born on November 8, 1945, in Bath, New York. His father, Joseph James DeAngelo Sr., was a sergeant in the United States Army. His mother was named Kathleen. Joseph had 2 sisters, Rebecca and Constance, and one brother, John. When Joseph was a young boy, his family was stationed at a U.S. Air Force base in West Germany. A family member later said that during this time, Joseph saw his sister Constance being attacked by 2 airmen in a warehouse. Joseph's sister Rebecca also said that their father was abusive toward Joseph while he was growing up. The family moved to California. Between 1959 and 1960, Joseph attended Mills Junior High School in Rancho Cordova. He then went to Folsom High School. He did not graduate in the usual way, but received a GED certificate in 1964. He played on the school's junior varsity baseball team. Later, lawyers would state that during his teenage years, Joseph committed burglaries, stole mail, and hurt and killed animals. In September 1964, Joseph joined the United States Navy. He served for 22 months on ships during the Vietnam War. After leaving the Navy, he began taking college classes. In August 1968, he started at Sierra College in Rocklin, California. He studied police science and graduated with good grades. He then went to Sacramento State University in 1971. There, he earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. He also took more police training classes at the College of the Sequoias in Visalia and did a police internship in Roseville. In May 1973, Joseph became a police officer in the city of Exeter, California. He worked in the burglary unit. Then, in August 1976, he moved to a police job in Auburn, California. In July 1979, he was arrested for shoplifting. He stole a hammer and a can of dog repellent from a store. He was given 6 months of probation for this crime and was fired from the police force in October 1979. During the process of being fired, he threatened to kill the police chief. He also reportedly watched the chief's house. In his personal life, Joseph became engaged to a woman named Bonnie in May 1970. She was a nursing student he met in college. She ended the relationship in 1971. She said he had become controlling and mean. After the breakup, he once tried to force her to marry him by threatening her with a gun. In November 1973, Joseph married a different woman named Sharon Marie Huddle. The wedding was in Auburn. In 1980, they bought a house in Citrus Heights, California. They also bought a second home in Long Beach later. Sharon became a divorce lawyer in 1982. They had 3 daughters together. The couple separated in 1991. It is not completely clear what jobs Joseph held during the 1980s. It is suspected he worked as a computer engineer and as a store cashier. From 1990 until he retired in 2017, he had a steady job. He worked as a truck mechanic at a Save Mart Supermarkets distribution center in Roseville, California. People who knew Joseph described some strange behavior. His brother-in-law said Joseph would sometimes talk about the East Area Rapist during the time those crimes were happening. Neighbors said he would often have loud, angry outbursts and use bad language. One neighbor said they got a phone message from Joseph threatening to deliver a load of death because their dog barked too much. At the time of his eventual arrest, he was living with one of his daughters and a granddaughter. After he was fired from the Auburn Police Department in 1979, Joseph DeAngelo began a long series of crimes that had actually started years earlier, while he was still a police officer. These crimes escalated over time and spread across California. In the Visalia area, from 1974 to 1975, a burglar known as the Visalia Ransacker committed over 100 break-ins. The burglar would enter homes, often through a window. He did not just steal things. He would mess up the houses, scattering the owner's belongings. He stole items like coins, stamps, and single pieces of jewelry, but often left more valuable things behind. He would move furniture and leave windows open for a quick escape. He wore gloves and never left fingerprints. On September 11, 1975, this criminal broke into the home of Claude Snelling, a college teacher. Snelling woke up and saw the burglar trying to kidnap his teenage daughter from their carport. Snelling tried to stop him. The burglar then shot Snelling twice. Snelling died from his wounds. The attacker hit the daughter and then ran away. A stolen bicycle was found nearby. After this murder, police increased their efforts to catch the ransacker. In December 1975, a police detective named William McGowan was on a stakeout in a garage in Visalia, watching for the ransacker. A masked man entered the yard. Detective McGowan tried to arrest him. The man pretended to surrender but then pulled out a gun and shot at McGowan, shattering his flashlight. The man escaped. Items he dropped, including a sock full of coins, were collected as evidence. DeAngelo then moved to the Sacramento area. His crimes became more violent. From 1976 to 1979, a criminal known as the East Area Rapist attacked people in their homes. He first targeted women who were home alone. He would break in at night, often through a sliding glass door. He would shine a flashlight in the victim's face, threaten them with a knife or gun, and tie them up using cords or shoelaces he found in the house. He would then rape the woman. He sometimes spent hours in the home, eating food or drinking beer. In one attack in December 1976, he attacked a 15-year-old girl home alone. He raped her multiple times over 2 hours, leaving her tied up before he left. Later, he began attacking couples. His method was to awaken a sleeping couple with his flashlight. He would make the woman tie up the man with ligatures. He would then place dishes on the man's back and threaten to kill everyone if he heard the dishes rattle. He would take the woman to another room and rape her. During a 1978 attack, a victim heard him whispering, "I hate you, Bonnie," while he assaulted her. This was the name of his former fiancée. He also made many disturbing phone calls to victims before and after attacks. He would sometimes call and say nothing, or say "it's me again," or make direct threats. On February 2nd, 1978, a young married couple, Brian and Katie Majori, were walking their dog in Rancho Cordova. They encountered a man in the area. They ran, but he chased them and shot them both dead. Police later believed the East Area Rapist was responsible for these murders because they happened in his area and a shoelace was found near the scene. After the summer of 1979, the attacks in Northern California stopped. The crimes then appeared in Southern California. Here, the criminal was called the original Night Stalker. He began killing his victims. On October 1st, 1979, in Goleta, an intruder broke into a couple's home and tied them up. The couple heard him say, "I'll kill him," to himself. They struggled and screamed, and he ran away on a bicycle. On December 30th, 1979, also in Goleta, a doctor named Robert Offerman and a psychologist named Deborah Manning were found shot dead in Offerman's home. Manning had been raped. The killer had eaten food from the refrigerator. A stolen bicycle was found nearby. On March 13th, 1980, in Ventura, Charlene and Lyman Smith were found murdered in their home. They had been beaten to death with a log from their yard. Charlene Smith had been raped. The killer had tied their wrists with a distinctive type of knot. On August 19th, 1980, in Dana Point, Keith and Patrice Harrington were found bludgeoned to death in their home. Patrice had been raped. On February 6, 1981, in Irvine, Manuela Withun was found murdered in her home. She had been raped and beaten. Her husband was in the hospital at the time, so she was alone. On July 27, 1981, in Goleta, Sherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez were murdered. Sanchez was shot. Domingo was raped and beaten to death. The last known crime happened on May 4, 1986, in Irvine. An 18-year-old woman named Janelle Cruz was home alone while her family was on vacation. She was raped and brutally beaten to death. A real estate agent found her body when showing the house to a buyer. Throughout this period, police in different cities collected evidence like shoelaces, cords, and in later years, DNA from the crime scenes. They noted the similar methods used in the rapes and murders, but did not have a suspect. For a long time, they did not know that the Visalia ransacker, the East Area Rapist, and the original Night Stalker were all the same man. For many years, the crimes committed by the Visalia ransacker, the East Area Rapist, and the original Night Stalker were investigated by separate police departments. They were not officially connected. The first major break came in 2001. Advances in DNA technology allowed crime lab technicians to compare old evidence from different cases. They found that DNA from the scene of the 1980 murder of Charlene Smith in Ventura matched DNA from a 1978 rape case in Contra Costa County committed by the East Area Rapist. This proved that the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same person. This connected the rapes in Northern California to the murders in Southern California. The investigation, however, stalled for over a decade. Police had the killer's DNA profile, but could not match it to any name in their criminal databases. This meant he had no prior felony conviction that required a DNA sample. In 2016, the FBI held a news conference to renew public interest in the case, which they now called the Golden State Killer case. They released new information and increased the reward for tips. A team of dedicated detectives, including Paul Holes from Contra Costa County, kept working on the case using new methods. The biggest breakthrough happened in 2018. Investigators decided to use a new technique called genetic genealogy. They took the unknown killer's DNA profile from a crime scene and uploaded it to a public website called GeneMatch. This website is used by people who want to research their family history using DNA. The website compared the killer's DNA to the DNA of other people who had used the site. It produced a list of distant relatives who shared some DNA with the killer. These were people like third or fourth cousins. A genealogist named Barbara Ravenner worked with investigators. Using the list of distant relatives, she built large, detailed family trees. She traced the family lines back through generations. The goal was to find a place where these different family trees intersected, leading to a common ancestor. After months of work, they built a tree with about 1,000 people on it. They then began the process of elimination. They looked at all the men on the tree, considering their age, where they lived during the crimes, and other factors. One by one, they ruled people out. This process led them to a man named Joseph James DeAngelo. He fit the profile perfectly. The right age, had lived in or near all the crime areas, and had a background in law enforcement. He was now their prime suspect. To confirm their suspicion, investigators needed to get a fresh sample of his DNA to compare to the crime scene DNA. In April 2018, detectives followed DeAngelo, who was now 72 years old and living in Citrus Heights. They watched him as he went to a hobby store. After he left, they collected DNA from the driver's door handle of his car. Later, they collected a discarded tissue from his garbage can outside his home. The DNA from these items was a perfect match to the Golden State Killer's DNA. On April 24, 2018, Sacramento County Sheriff's deputies arrested Joseph DeAngelo in the driveway of his home. He was taken to jail and charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. More charges were added later from other counties. In total, he was charged with 13 murders and 13 related kidnappings. He could not be charged with the rapes because the statute of limitations, a legal time limit for filing charges, had run out. The court process began. Because the case was so large, involving many counties and decades of evidence, prosecutors estimated a trial could take years and cost taxpayers millions of dollars. In 2020, to avoid a long and painful trial for the victims' families, a plea agreement was reached. DeAngelo agreed to plead guilty to all the murder and kidnapping charges. In return, the prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. The sentence would be life in prison without the possibility of parole. On June 29, 2020, DeAngelo appeared in a socially distanced courtroom due to the COVID-19 pandemic. For over 2 hours, a prosecutor read the details of every murder and rape-linked kidnapping charge. After each description, the judge asked DeAngelo how he pleaded. Each time he said, "Guilty." He admitted to being the Visalia ransacker, the East Area rapist, and the original Night Stalker. In August 2020, a sentencing hearing was held over several days. Dozens of survivors and family members of victims gave statements. They spoke directly to DeAngelo, telling him about the pain and trauma he had caused. They described lives forever broken by his actions. After listening to all of them, DeAngelo stood up, removed his face mask, and said, "I've listened to all your statements, each one of them, and I'm truly sorry to everyone I've hurt." Many observers felt his apology was hollow and came too late. On August 21, 2020, the judge formally sentenced Joseph James DeAngelo. He received multiple consecutive sentences of life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was later transferred to a state prison to serve his sentence. He will die in prison. The decades-long hunt for the Golden State Killer was finally over, bringing a measure of justice and closure to the victims and their families. Joseph James DeAngelo remains incarcerated in a California prison for the rest of his life. Story 7. Michael Bruce Ross was born on July 26, 1959, in Putnam, Connecticut. His parents were Dan Graham Ross and Patricia Hilda Lane. He was the oldest child in the family. Later, he would have 2 younger sisters and a younger brother. The Ross family lived on a chicken farm in the town of Brooklyn, Connecticut. Life on the farm was not easy, and the family did not have much money. Michael's home life was very troubled. His mother, Patricia, suffered from mental health problems. She was sometimes placed in hospitals for treatment. Her behavior was unpredictable. She was known to hit her children. There were also times when she left the family, abandoning them for periods. This made the home feel unstable and unsafe for the children. There were further troubles in Michael's early childhood. Some family members and friends later said that Michael was sexually abused when he was very young. They believed the abuser was a teenage uncle. This uncle died by suicide when Michael was 6 years old. These experiences caused confusion and pain for the young boy. When Michael was 12 years old, he himself did something very wrong. He touched 2 young girls in a sexual way. This behavior showed that he had serious problems. When his father, Dan, found out about this, he did not get Michael professional help. Instead, he beat Michael as a punishment. The way punishment worked in the house was that Michael's mother would decide when he should be punished, and his father would carry out the physical beating. Despite the chaos at home, Michael was very smart. He did well in his schoolwork. He learned things quickly and got good grades. He attended Killingly High School in Connecticut. He was a good student there and graduated in the year 1977. Because of his high grades, he was able to go to a well-known university called Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. At Cornell University, Michael studied economics. He continued to do well in his classes. He was quiet and kept to himself. He graduated from Cornell in May of 1981. During his time at college, however, he started to develop very bad behaviors. In his second year of college, he began following women without their knowledge. This is called stalking. He would watch them, which gave him a sense of control. In his final year of college, he committed a very serious crime against a woman. He also committed another, even worse crime soon after. But his life as a student appeared normal on the outside. After graduating from university, Michael Ross got a job. He became an insurance salesman. He wore suits and tried to act like a normal professional man. But inside, his thoughts were dark. The urges that started in college were getting stronger. He felt a growing anger and a desire to dominate. His social life was almost non-existent. He did not have real friends. He spent most of his time alone with his thoughts. The well-dressed salesman was hiding a very different person underneath. After graduating from Cornell University in May 1981, Michael Ross began his job as an insurance salesman. The dark urges he had first acted on in college did not go away. Instead, they became stronger. He started to plan his actions. He used his normal appearance and his car as tools to find victims. His first known murder happened very soon after he finished college. On May 12, 1981, a 25-year-old Cornell student named Zung Nak Tu was working late in Warren Hall on campus. Ross entered the building. He attacked Zung, strangled her, and then carried her body to his car. He drove to a nearby gorge and threw her body into a creek at the bottom. When she was found days later, the police thought she had died by suicide. Ross told no one about this crime and continued with his life. In his job, Ross often drove long distances to meet clients. He used these car trips to look for victims. On January 5, 1982, he was driving through Brooklyn, Connecticut. He saw a 17-year-old girl named Tammy Williams walking alone. He stopped his car and offered her a ride. She accepted. Ross then drove to a remote area. He assaulted Tammy, raped her, and then strangled her to death. He left her body there. It was found later. The police had no strong leads. Ross continued to use his car to find vulnerable people. Hitchhikers were easy targets. On April 2nd, 1982, he was driving from Cornell back to Connecticut. Near Wallkill, New York, he saw a 16-year-old girl named Paula Pereira hitchhiking. He picked her up. He drove to a secluded place, raped her, and strangled her. He dumped her body near Interstate 84. It was found 18 days later. The police in different states did not connect these crimes yet. Ross's method was always similar. He used his ordinary looks to seem harmless. He used his car to move victims to isolated places. On June 15, 1982, he saw a 23-year-old woman named Deborah Smith Taylor. Her car had run out of fuel on a road near Danielson, Connecticut. She was alone, looking for help. Ross stopped. He offered help, but then forced her into his car. He drove to a remote location, raped her, and strangled her. Her skeletal remains were found by a jogger 4 months later. For over a year after this, Ross did not kill anyone that police know of. But his violent behavior continued. In 1983, he was suspected of raping a 21-year-old woman named Vivian Dobson in Plainfield, Connecticut. The local police did not believe Ross was responsible for this attack. They did not charge him. His killing started again on November 19, 1983. In Norwich, Connecticut, he picked up a 19-year-old hitchhiker named Robin Dawn Stavinsky. He drove her to the wooded grounds of the Norwich State Hospital. He raped her and strangled her there. Her body was discovered a week later. Ross's crimes became more bold. On April 22, 1984, he was driving near Griswold, Connecticut. He saw two 14-year-old girls, April Bernays and Leslie Shelley, walking home together. He stopped his car and forced both girls into the vehicle at gunpoint. He drove them across the state line to Beach Pond in Rhode Island. There, he sexually assaulted April Bernays. He then strangled both girls. He put their bodies in the trunk of his car. He drove back to Connecticut and dumped their bodies in a culvert near the town of Preston. He committed his last murder on June 13, 1984. In Griswold, Connecticut, he saw 17-year-old Wendy Barabalt walking along Route 12 to a convenience store. He attacked her, forced her into his car, and drove to a field. He sexually assaulted her and strangled her. He left her body in the field. It was found 2 days later. This time, there was a critical difference. Several people had seen Wendy talking to a man in a car. They gave a description of the car and the man to the police. The description matched Michael Ross. The witness descriptions from Wendy Barabalt's murder gave Connecticut State Police their first major lead. People described a man in a clean, newer car who looked like a businessman. The police gathered all these details. They began to look for a white man with glasses who drove a certain type of car. They checked lists of people who lived in or traveled through the areas where the other girls had been killed. This process led them to Michael Ross. He was an insurance salesman who drove a company car matching the description. He also lived in the general area and traveled for work. The police brought him in for questioning. At first, Ross denied any involvement. However, the police were persistent. They questioned him for a long time. They also searched his car and his home. During the search, they found small pieces of evidence that connected him to the crimes. Faced with the evidence, Ross decided to confess. He told the police everything he had done. He gave detailed accounts of the murders of the 4 youngest victims, April Bernays, Leslie Shelley, Wendy Barabalt, and Robin Dawn Stavinsky. He explained his methods, how he used his job as cover, and where he had left the bodies. His confession was recorded and written down. This confession was the key piece of evidence for the prosecution. Ross was charged with multiple counts of murder and sexual assault. His case went to trial in 1987. In court, the prosecutors presented his detailed confession. They also presented the physical evidence that police had collected, which supported his statements. The defense lawyers did not try to say he was innocent. Instead, they argued that Ross was mentally ill. They said he had a sexual disorder that made him unable to control his urges. They asked the jury to find him guilty, but mentally ill. The jury listened to all the evidence. They did not accept the argument that he was mentally ill in the legal sense. They found Michael Ross guilty of multiple murders. The judge, G. Sarsfield Ford, then sentenced Ross to death for his crimes. He was sent to death row to await execution. For many years after the trial, Ross appealed his death sentence. His lawyers filed many legal papers to try to stop the execution. They argued about his mental state and about legal procedures. During this time, Ross was in prison. He became a devout Catholic. He met with priests regularly. He also met a woman named Susan Powers, who became his fiancée for a time. In prison, he worked translating books into Braille and mentored other inmates. In 2001, while still on death row, Ross was taken to New York State to face charges for the murder of Paula Pereira. He pleaded guilty to a charge of manslaughter there. He received an additional prison sentence of 8 to 25 years, but he was already on death row in Connecticut, so this did not change his situation. As the years passed, Ross changed his mind about fighting his execution. In 2004, he said he wanted to accept his death sentence. He stated that he did not want the families of his victims to suffer through more court hearings and appeals. He said he wanted to give them closure. His own lawyer and his father tried to stop him, arguing he was not mentally competent to make this choice. They said the long time on death row, a condition sometimes called death row syndrome, had damaged his mind. The courts reviewed this and ultimately decided Ross was competent. The state of Connecticut scheduled his execution. After several last-minute delays because of legal arguments, the execution proceeded. On May 13, 2005, at the Osborne Correctional Institution in Somers, Connecticut, Michael Bruce Ross was executed by lethal injection. He was 45 years old. When asked for a final statement, he declined. He was pronounced dead at 2:25 in the morning. After the execution, the families of the victims said they finally felt a sense of justice and could begin to move forward. Ross's execution was the first in Connecticut in 45 years. Several years later, in 2012, the state of Connecticut abolished the death penalty for future crimes. The last person to be executed under the old law was Michael Bruce Ross, and his case marked the end of a long and painful chapter for the state and the victims' families. Story 8. Arthur Shawcross was born on June 6, 1945, in the town of Kittery, Maine. He was the first child of Arthur Roy Shawcross and Elizabeth Yerrick Shawcross, who was called Bessie or Betty. After his birth, the family moved to Watertown, New York. Arthur would have 3 younger siblings as he grew up. From a very young age, Arthur exhibited problems. He was a frequent bedwetter throughout his childhood. Later in his life, Arthur would claim that his mother sexually abused him. He said this abuse started when he was 7 years old. He also claimed that during his time in junior high school, he had sexual relations with one of his sisters. At school, Arthur gained a reputation as a bully. He would often act out in aggressive and violent ways towards other children. His difficulties in school continued, and he eventually dropped out completely in 1960, when he was 15 years old. As a young adult, Arthur Shawcross married for the first time. In April 1967, when he was 21, he was drafted into the United States Army to serve in the Vietnam War. Around this same time, he divorced his first wife. As part of the divorce, he gave up all his legal rights to their son, who was 18 months old. Arthur never saw his son again. Arthur Shawcross served one tour of duty in Vietnam with the 4th Infantry Division. His official job was in supply and transport, not in a frontline combat role. However, after the war, he would often tell stories about committing violent acts during the war. These stories included claims of beheading people and acts of cannibalism. Military records showed he was not in a position to have done these things. After Vietnam, he was stationed at an army base in Lawton, Oklahoma, where he worked as an armorer, maintaining weapons. While in Oklahoma, he married his second wife, a woman named Linda. During this marriage, Linda observed Arthur's disturbing behavior. She noticed he had a strong habit of starting fires. An army psychiatrist told Linda that Arthur was sexually aroused by setting fires. This behavior contributed to the end of their marriage. After he was discharged from the army, Arthur moved back to New York with Linda, settling in Clayton. They soon divorced. Now living alone in New York, Arthur began committing crimes. These crimes included arson, which is setting illegal fires, and burglary, which is breaking into buildings to steal. These crimes led to his arrest. He was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He served his time at 2 different prisons, Attica and Auburn. While in Attica prison, there was a major riot. During this riot, Arthur helped rescue a correctional officer. Because of this action, he was granted an early release from prison. He had served only 22 months of his 5-year sentence. He was released in October 1971 and returned to his hometown of Watertown. Back in Watertown, Arthur Shawcross found a job with the city's Public Works Department. He also married for a 3rd time. He seemed to be settling into a normal life. Then in 1972, he was arrested for the murders of 2 children. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of manslaughter for these deaths. The court sentenced him to a maximum of 25 years in prison. Arthur Shawcross was sent to Green Haven Correctional Facility. He served 14 years there. During his time in prison, some staff and social workers who were new to the job began to believe he was no longer a danger to society. They did this despite other doctors, called psychiatrists, who said Arthur was a very disturbed and dangerous person. These psychiatrists had assessed him as a schizoid psychopath. Because the prison staff believed he was safe, he was released on parole in April 1987. After his release, Arthur had trouble finding a place to live and a job. People in communities would protest when they learned he was there, and employers would refuse to hire him. He first moved to Binghamton, New York, with a girlfriend named Rose Marie Wally. When people found out who he was, they moved to the town of Delhi. The same thing happened there, so they moved again to a town called Fleischmann's. They faced hostility there as well. Finally, his parole officer moved Arthur and his girlfriend to a city called Rochester in late June 1987. They stayed in a temporary hotel at first. The parole officer did not tell the Rochester police that a convicted killer had moved into the area. In mid-October, Arthur and Rose Marie found a permanent apartment on Alexander Street in Rochester. Arthur Shawcross lived quietly in his Rochester apartment for several months after moving there in late 1987. In March 1988, he began a series of murders. His victims were mostly women involved in prostitution. He would find them in areas of the city known for this activity. His first victim in Rochester was a 27-year-old woman named Dorothy Blackburn, who was called Dottie. On March 18, 1988, Shawcross met her and offered to pay for sex. He drove her to a secluded area near the Genesee River. After having sex, he strangled her with his hands. He then left her body in the underbrush near the river. Her body was found 6 days later, on March 24th. For over a year, Shawcross did not kill again. Then, on July 9, 1988, he met a 28-year-old woman named Anna Marie Stephan. He followed the same pattern. He picked her up, drove to a remote spot by the river, and after sex, he strangled her. He pushed her body down the riverbank. Her body was not discovered until September 11th, over 2 months later. Shawcross waited another year before killing again. On July 29th, 1989, he met 59-year-old Dorothy Keeler. He killed her using the same method, strangulation by hand after sex. He left her body in a wooded area near the river. Her body was found much later, on October 21st. The killings then became more frequent. On September 29, 1989, Shawcross killed 25-year-old Patricia Ives, known as Patty. He strangled her and left her body in a creek. It was found on October 27th. On October 23rd, he killed 30-year-old June Stott. Her body was found in the Genesee River on November 23rd. In early November, Shawcross began to change his methods. On November 5th, he met 22-year-old Marie Welch. He strangled her, but he also stabbed her in the neck with a small knife. He left her body in the river. It was found on January 5th, 1990. On November 11th, he killed 22-year-old Frances Brown, called Franny. He strangled her and stabbed her multiple times. He left her body in a park, where it was found 4 days later on November 15th. Later on that same day, November 15th, Shawcross killed again. He met 30-year-old Kimberly Logan. He strangled her and stabbed her. He then put her body in the river. It was found the same day, which was unusual, as his other victims were often hidden for longer periods. Shawcross did not stop. On November 25th, he met 29-year-old Elizabeth Gibson, called Liz. He drove her to a different county, Wayne County, and killed her there. He strangled and stabbed her, leaving her body in a ditch. It was found 2 days later on November 27th. In December 1989, the killings continued. On December 15th, Shawcross killed 32-year-old Darlene Trippi. He strangled and stabbed her, then placed her body in the Genesee River. Her body was found on January 5th, 1990. On December 17th, he killed 33-year-old June Cicero. He strangled her and left her body near Salmon Creek, a stream that flows into the Genesee River. Her body was found on January 3rd, 1990. His final victim was 20-year-old Felicia Stevens, killed on December 28th, 1989. He strangled her. He then placed her body in the Genesee River. It was found on December 31st. During this time, the Rochester police knew that several murdered women had been found in or near the river. However, they did not immediately connect all the killings to one person. This was because the victims were of different ages and backgrounds, and the methods had small differences, like the occasional use of a knife. The police initially thought more than one killer might be responsible. They did not yet know that a single man, Arthur Shawcross, was committing all these crimes. The investigation into the murders began to focus when the body of June Cicero was discovered on January 3rd, 1990. Her body was found near Salmon Creek, south of the city of Rochester. Because this body was found so soon after the murder, the police decided to watch the area closely. They believed the killer might return to the place where he left a body. On January 5th, 1990, a police surveillance team was watching the bridges over Salmon Creek. On one bridge, they saw a man standing by a car. An eyewitness also saw this man. The man was Arthur Shawcross. The police and the witness observed that Shawcross appeared to be masturbating while looking over the bridge toward the area where June Cicero's body had been found. The police immediately detained him. The police questioned Arthur Shawcross. At first, he denied any involvement in the murders. However, the police found physical evidence linking him to the crimes. They also began to connect all the different murders to one person. Under questioning, Shawcross eventually confessed to killing 11 women in the Rochester area. He provided details about the murders that only the killer would know. He led the police to locations and described his methods. The district attorney's office charged Arthur Shawcross with 10 counts of murder in Monroe County. His trial began in November 1990. Shawcross pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. This meant his lawyers argued he was mentally ill and could not understand that his actions were wrong. His defense team called a forensic psychiatrist named Dorothy Lewis to testify. Dr. Lewis said that Shawcross had brain damage, a condition now called dissociative identity disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. She said he had been sexually abused as a child. She argued that when he killed, he became a different personality named Bessie. The defense wanted him to be sent to a mental hospital instead of prison. The prosecution, led by First Assistant District Attorney Charles Siragusa, argued against the insanity claim. They called their own psychiatric expert, Dr. Park Dietz. Dr. Dietz testified that Shawcross had antisocial personality disorder, not a disorder that would make him legally insane. He explained that this meant Shawcross knew his actions were wrong, but chose to do them anyway. The prosecution also addressed Shawcross's claim that his violence was caused by trauma from the Vietnam War. An FBI criminal profiler, Robert Ressler, reviewed Shawcross's military records. He testified that Shawcross's stories about war atrocities were false, and that he never served in combat. Medical tests did show Shawcross had a brain cyst and scarring on his frontal lobes, but the prosecution argued this did not remove his knowledge of right and wrong. The jury listened to all the evidence. They did not accept the insanity defense. They found Arthur Shawcross guilty of all 10 murder charges. The judge sentenced him to 10 life sentences in prison. These sentences were to be served one after the other, meaning he would never be eligible for parole. Arthur Shawcross was sent to the Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York. He remained in prison for the rest of his life. In 2003, he gave an interview where he boasted about mutilating some of his victims, but much of what he said was considered unreliable. On November 10, 2008, Arthur Shawcross, then 63 years old, complained of leg pain in his prison cell. He was taken to Albany Medical Center. At the hospital, he suffered cardiac arrest. He was pronounced dead at 9:50 p.m. that night. The families of his victims received the news of his death. For them, there was no longer a threat of him ever being released, but the pain of their loss remained. The long series of crimes was finally over.